everyone. We can go ahead and get started. Welcome to Engineering Spotlight. This is our second virtual learning event. I'm Rebecca Wingate, president of the Chicago Engineers Foundation, and we're pleased to present this series of virtual opportunities which discusses trending topics with industry experts. And we're excited to bring you today's presentation on engineers mobilizing to fight COVID-19. Today's presentation is made possible by generous sponsors, including Tom Penn, Stephen Schlegel, the Crow family, and Martha Jean Martin. Proceeds from our Engineering Spotlight events benefit the Chicago Engineers Foundation student programs. We are a student-centered organization which proudly supports Chicago's future engineers with STEM activities, as well as scholarship awards and career resources to help college students achieve their engineering career goals. More information about CEF is available at our website, chicagoengineersfoundation.org, and via our social media pages. And now please welcome Tom Penn, a member of the CEF Board of Directors, who will introduce today's agenda and our special guest.
Thank you, Becky, and welcome everybody who's joined. Appreciate everybody being here. My name is Tom Penn, and I'll be the MC of this event. I'm currently on the board of the CEF, as Becky mentioned. I'm a graduate of the University of Illinois in aerospace engineering, so Greg's department is where I came from, and so I'm very proud of that over the years. And I'm also on the alumni advisory board for the aerospace engineering group at Illinois. So I've been involved with the department for the last few years, and I've been close to the university ever since graduation. Also, I got to know Greg a little bit when he served as the interim department head in 2019. So one of the many hats he's worn includes heading up the department. I personally spent about 12 years in the aerospace business in spacecraft system and mission design. That's really still my passion from a professional point of view. And then I moved into the medical device world for the last 20 years, building products such as MRI scanners, CT scanners, stuff like that, and then smaller items such as infusion pumps and AEDs. So that kind of experience makes today's talk even more exciting to me. It's very rare in somebody's career that you get a chance, an opportunity to do something as sort of mission critical, and you get to break the rules and start from scratch because you have to. So they say necessity is the mother of invention, and I think Greg's story is going to illustrate that very clearly. So with that, enough about me. I'd like to introduce Dr. Greg Elliot. So I'll give you a little background, and then we'll jump right into the presentation. So Dr. Greg Elliot is aerospace engineering professor. He's the lab director also, and a member of the Illinois RapidVent team, which is the subject of today's discussion. Dr. Elliott's research includes experimental thermal and fluid sciences, including aerodynamics, supersonic and hypersonic flows, turbulence, combustion, and plasma interactions, with an emphasis on the development and application of optical and laser-based diagnostics. So that's all the technical speak. What that really means is, in layman's terms, that everything that Greg deals with goes really, really fast, and the fluids are really, really hot. Okay, so his experiments might last a fraction of a second. You'll have ignition, combustion, flow, lift, and all this stuff happens in less than a second. And he's trying to document that and measure it with optical and laser techniques. So it's really cool. And if you see his lab, everything's got, pressure gauges, and, everything's dangerous. So it's a very cool place to see. So that's what he does at University of Illinois. Dr. Elliott's earned his degrees at the Ohio State University. So he got a bachelor's, master's, and PhD in mechanical engineering, graduating in 1993. So another great school in the Big Ten network. And he was previously a faculty member at Rutgers and has been a professor in the aerospace engineering department at University of Illinois since 2003. And Greg, I have no idea how Rutgers got into the Big Ten, but they are. So maybe you can comment on that. So during Greg's presentation, if you have questions or comments, use the chat feature, please. We're going to save questions until the end, unless there's something in the middle that we really aren't understanding, and then we'll jump in and clarify. So with that, I'd like to ask everyone to please welcome Dr. Greg Elliot.
Oh, thank you very much, Tom. It's really a privilege to be here. I love talking about this project. It's really a passion of mine to be able to work on a project like this that really came about. And I'll kind of tell you the story about this. But first, let me also thank the Chicago Engineers Research Foundation for inviting me and giving me the privilege of speaking to you today. And also for Tom and Rebecca and Debbie. They did such a great job just putting this together and just putting the agenda together and everything. So I want to thank them also. So let's get right into it. So the presentation today is going to be about the Illinois RapidVent ventilator. We'll be talking about that today and the development and the story about how this happened. I do want to recognize some people on this, and there were about 40 engineers and scientists and doctors that worked on this program. The project leader on the development of this device was Bill King. He's in the Mechanical Sciences and Engineering department. He's another professor here. He was kind of the manager of the project, bringing all these groups together. The engineering and test team, which I was a part of, and so we did the engineering of the device. You can see the names there: Stefan Elbill, myself, Blake Johnson, one of my former graduate students, Sam Tuflik, Tong Hoon Lee, and Andrew Muser, who worked on this project. And we were kind of the engineering team that worked on the design of this device. So let's get right into it. Basically, what I'm doing is you can look at this as a case study from my point of view. So if you asked how the development of this device affected different individuals, what they did, you're going to get 40 different stories. So this is kind of from my point of view. And I'll share with you how the device came about and how we came about the opportunity to design this device. But also at the end, I really want to go into, especially for the students, high school students, college students that are out there, just a couple of things from my past that really made it possible for me to be able to work on this device. So first, this was the email that I received that was on March 14th. And, I want to emphasize that I don't, enjoy the reason that this email was sent to me, for the pandemic that we're still coming out of and hopefully getting on the other side of. But you don't get an email with this kind of urgency. This came from Harley Johnson, who is in the College of Engineering. He's the Associate Dean for Research. And so my then department head, John Friend, had recommended me for this project. And basically, it came down to that highlighted sentence that the hospital, this was Carl Hospital, which is our local hospital, expects to need 400 additional ventilators to accumulate patients needed in ICU care. And this was based on estimates, particularly as we were looking at trends in New York City and New York State also, and then also some of the European countries. And so we were looking at a projection where we may have individuals that were looking to be able to give treatment to 400 individuals using ventilators. And so with that, first I get past the shock of how urgent this is and what a privilege it is that they looked at some of my skills and turned to me. But the immediate thing was to find out, okay, I need to learn as much as I can about this device. And during one of our first meetings, it really brings it home when you have a doctor that you're talking to and they're asking you to develop a device so that they don't have to make choices in an ICU of who received care and who does not receive care. And so that really came across in even our early meetings. So the first thing that I actually did that night was really look at, what is a ventilator? So I think this will be helpful to you that may be in different engineering disciplines. And this is basically a machine that mechanically assists a patient to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. And sometimes this is referred to as artificial respiration. So what this machine will do is basically breathe for you. So make sure that you get the oxygen that your body needs and that you expel the carbon dioxide that is a byproduct of breathing. There's a couple definitions that I want to go over that in this story I'm about to tell that really helps. So one is a BPM, that's basically the breaths per minute. It's how much you inhale and exhale. And so it's the timing of that pattern. And you see we have in that graph, inspiratory is when you're receiving the oxygen, breathing in, and expiratory is whenever you're breathing out. There's a couple of pressures here that we look at. One is called the PIP pressure. This is the peak inspiratory pressure. It's the highest pressure that we get in this breathing cycle. And then there's another one that is the positive in expiratory pressure. This is the lowest pressure in that cycle, and it's the pressure as you're expelling the gases out of your lungs. And then we also have the fraction of inspired oxygen was another thing that so how much, whenever you're using bottled oxygen, what percentage of oxygen do you use during that inspiratory period? And then also additional breathing controls that we wanted to be able to control for safety. And I'll show you a couple of the things that we did for safety, that we didn't overpressurize the lungs. Also operating standards, there's standard fittings that they have in the hospital to be able to use those. And then also to be able to put monitors on the device to look at the blood CO2 level, O2 levels, and pH was particularly important to be able to monitor. So with that, really Bill King early on got a few engineers together to do a trade study, and we had talked about this in our early meetings, and that was, what kind of solution should we help develop? The hospital had given us, really, they wanted some solution that we could have tested in about 2 weeks from that first letter, and then to be operational maybe in the 3 to 4 week time frame. So a couple of things that we looked at is the standard electronic computer controlled ventilators that you would see in a hospital, where they have valves and computer controls to be able to monitor the breathing process. There's also the manual handheld ventilators that you could use, and you've probably seen on some television show or movie, that they would have in an ambulance that would be able to breathe for you, but it's hand operated. There's been some other schools that looked at, I think MIT had a approach where they took one of these and made it so that it would be operated by a machine instead of a person. And then there was the gas-driven emergency transport ventilators. And this was really the solution that early on, I think we had to make a decision within those first few meetings. And I think it was the one that Bill was actually also looking at, is a gas-driven emergency transport ventilator. And so these ventilators are actually commonly used in a couple different venues. One is they're a ventilator that doesn't need electricity, so it's all operated off of pneumatics, off of the oxygen or oxygen air supply that you have to it. There's a low part count, so that means that whenever we're going through any kind of approval procedures, there's a lower part count that we can put many of these together to as far as manufacturing. And as we looked at this device, really the thing that we were doing is trying to find something that was easily manufactured that we could also use and additive manufacturing, or you might have heard of this as 3D printing or rapid prototype manufacturing. So we could use those techniques to build a respirator, a ventilator. And there are examples of these that we could use as reference designs, so that you'll see that there's a Fortran go-to vent. That's basically what our design is based on. I mean, if you look, we learned a lot by taking apart those devices and looking at how they worked. It was interesting from my past. I actually have a very good friend who's a fireman. And so immediately when I saw we were going through this solution, I gave him a call and asked him, do you know about these? You know, how do they work? And he was able to give me a lot of practical guidance as far as how they worked and how they used them in the field. And so we had some confidence that we could design and build this approach, a gas-driven emergency ventilator. Just the RapidVent team, to tell you a little more about that, basically we were broken up into several different areas: supply chain, as far as building the devices, engineering and test, which was what I was under. We also had doctors. We had vets that helped us with the animal studies. And then also many of the people on the team, over 400 engineers, doctors, and medical professionals, designers, and people that just had practical experience in building devices. Not only the Grainger College of Engineering was involved in this, but also Carle Hospital here. And then Tech Mill was one of the manufacturers that was involved in this center, so, or in this design team. So this was not myself at all, but definitely a team approach that Bill King was kind of the manager of this team. So I'm going to talk today really about engineering and test and the animal study, which I was involved in. And so I'll give you a little insight about what we did there. But first, you know, to start off the story, so as you saw, early March 14th, I'd received that email, and we were testing the first prototype of the device that we had designed by March 22nd. And let me just share this video. This is actually the video of, this is Stefan. He is such a great engineer, just a practical engineer who I was privileged to work with on this, the engineering team. And this is, I'm behind the camera, so Stefan will show you the device running here. So we'll watch this short video. The hissing is the air that's on some leaks in this.
We have the following configuration. We have rapid prototype modulator. We have HEPA filter in line, the way it should go. We have rapid prototype TP. We had a little bit of a leak with a check valve. We sealed it temporarily with some sealant stuff. So this fixes it for now. We have the moisture filter, so everything is the way it should be later in operation. We have removed the inlet cap, which means we are in training right now, 50%, so we have FEOI 50. And this explains a little bit of the entrainment noise we hear. If you look at the data, we have right now very regular cycles. We have an inlet pressure of 50 psi. We have a tip of approximately 30. And a peak of 10, which means we operate at a 3-to-1 ratio, exactly as we want it to be. If we see the flow rate, we have peak volume flows of up to 40 liters per minute. So although this is within range.
So that just shows you the operation of really the first test that we had in this device. And so the team came together and we had our first prototype working that was 3D printed, which was really one of the major things that we wanted to do, is to make a device that could not only be fabricated quickly, but also be, if we shared the design with others, it could be printed and manufactured easily by them. And just to show you kind of the layout of this, so we take, you might have, if you've ever been in a hospital, they have oxygen supply there. And so we used that oxygen. as the supply of not only the oxygen to supply to the patient, but it also was the driver of the ventilator. And that's the advantage of this, is there's no electrical connections that are needed. The oxygen that comes out of a hospital, we went over and measured it and verified it. It is provided at 50 psi and has a flow meter there that can be adjusted. Also, they had moisture filters, a HEPA filter that they would normally put in afterwards. So we wanted to make sure our device would run with those filters in place. And then as the air was exchanged, or the oxygen air mixture was exchanged with the patient, that we'd be able to use just standard fitting, standard hoses that the hospital already had. You can see here in the upper right, we used this device, and you can purchase artificial lungs that you can test these devices. It's a standard operating procedure to test ventilators using these artificial lungs. And so towards the upper right, you can just see the pressure traces as we look at the breathing cycles that the ventilator was actually able to produce in that artificial lung. And the PEEP and PIP ratio is an important ratio. So in other words, the highest pressure to the lowest pressure is an important ratio that they want to be able to set. And so we would show that we could change the breathing rate, set that ratio as they were accustomed to with the more electronic ventilators that they would have in the hospital. This is the RapidVent. So this is a CAD drawing of it. And I'll kind of go over just quickly the parts of this ventilator. It's basically had three sub-assemblies, the patient T, a manometer, and then a modulator. The patient T assembly, so basically what that did is first it provides a connection so that we can hook up the tubes that would go to the patient. So there's the breathing tube that it connects to the patient. It also, we incorporated a safety feature, as the reference design did too. This is a one-way flapper valve. So we designed a valve that would open if the patient would, sometimes whenever they use these respirators, most of the time, or many of the, quite often, the patient is actually put under anesthesia, and so this device is breathing for them. But every once in a while, if they wake up, they would take a breath themselves, and so that would not damage the device or damage their lungs. There's a flapper valve in there so that if they do have spontaneous inhalation, that it will open up and allow them to do that. Also, there's a pop-off valve that prevents overpressurization, so that if something was wrong in the system and there was too much oxygen pressure, that it wouldn't overpressurize the lungs. And then finally, there was an adapter that was designed so that we could change the percentage of oxygen. Generally, this would be driven by pure oxygen. But a patient can only be on pure oxygen for so long before it starts to actually harm their lungs. And so by designing an ejector system, which actually uses principles in supersonic flow, by designing an ejector, we can draw in room oxygen or room air, so that we can decrease the percentage of O2 going to the patient. And so that was a device that we had put on that would allow doctors to be able to set that. The other part of this device was the manometer subassembly. This just allows by the doctor to quickly look that, one, the device is working properly. So you could observe the PIP and PEEP pressure changing just to know that the patient was getting oxygen and that the breathing cycle was normal. And there's no electronics to this, so it's just a spring-loaded manometer. These, we actually bought the manometers off of medical websites. And so we designed this section so that we could use standard fitted manometers to do this. Later, there was another team that actually designed a device to fit onto the RapidVent so that it was electronic, so that it not only provided information about the pressure, but also about the breathing cycle, and also gave a warning if something went wrong. If a hose was kinked and the device stopped cycling, it would give off an alarm. So that was a separate project that was done by professors at the Grainger College of Engineering. And then finally, there's this modulator subassembly. This is probably the more complicated part of this device. So we needed to be able to have a modulator that would modulate how much pressure the patient would see, and to be able to adjust that, the PIP and PEEP pressures, but also to be able to adjust the rate of the breathing cycle. And so that's, this is probably what I spent more of my time on. I was kind of in charge of this part of the project, understanding how this worked and how this worked in the reference designs, and how this also, we could make this work in a rapid prototyping part. So the other thing, so it allows you to design, you can see the two knobs that are there, allowed you to set the pressure and also the rate of the breathing cycle. It was interesting to me how this device actually could work. So basically what we did is, in this modulator, designed it so that the tube that had come from the manometer and that was attached to the patient, and also the incoming oxygen, it would pressurize. And so you can see that little disc there, the green disc, that would actually start to be pressurized inside that tube. And then once, and so as that's being pressurized, the patient is going through an inhalation cycle. So the lungs are expanding and the patient is receiving oxygen. And then you finally get to a point where that pressure builds up enough that it overcomes that spring force that you adjust, and it opens. And so once that opens, then that valve, that disc, the diaphragm, actually rises above that tube, and the air and oxygen mixture leaks out with the CO2 and is evacuated from the modulator. And so this would be during the exhalation. And so by controlling with a needle valve that we put in the system, by controlling how much flow is going through that needle valve, we could actually control how much exhalation time occurred. And so this allowed us to control the breathing cycle of the device. And so that's basically how the device works. The RapidVent works. The one thing that we did quite a bit of testing on it. This was done at CTS, at Stefan's firm where he works. We had actually, and you'll see this image, I think if you watch an Illini basketball game, sometimes you'll see this image. We actually had 10 of these that we set up, we instrumented, and we actually wanted to look at the endurance of these. And so we ran millions of cycles through these, through the RapidVent ventilators, made sure that they could operate for days on time, and just looked at the failure modes that might occur. And I don't even know that we had one fail. I think there was some performance degradation, but we could always make adjustments for that. And so we just wanted to make sure that these devices wouldn't need to be switched out very often. And probably another thing that was new to me in the testing was animal testing. Now, all the animal testing that we did was done in accordance with the rules and regulations, both federal and state, and then also with this was conducted at one of the hog farms here at the University of Illinois. And basically they would knock out one of the pigs and put them under anesthesia. And then we would control their breathing with the rapid vent. And then all the vitals of the pig were monitored. This gave us a lot of information about how well the oxygen and CO2 exchange was occurring. They would draw blood from the animal to be able to make sure and measure the pH levels of the blood. We had several tests of this. Well, not several. I think we had about 5 or 6 times that I was involved in, and just to look at the animal to make sure that the health of the animal was maintained as we were using this ventilator. Just really interesting to work with the veterinary medicine people, and the vets there were just top notch. That it's one of the things about being involved at the University of Illinois and having a university environment. You can bring engineers and medical professionals and veterinary people all together on a project that really needed everyone and an expertise in all of these things to happen. And kind of just with the status, to let you know what was the end result of this. And so basically we had designed and tested the rapid vent. It probably over about 4 to 6 weeks, I think eventually at about the 6-week time schedule, we had actually posted the plans. And so the way the university decided to license this technology because of the pandemic, of course, is that to allow anyone to go in and download our data, download all of the CAD drawings, and all of the files that they would need to be able to rapid prototype this device. You can go to that website there and download those for yourself. And we had videos of the working principles, bill of materials. There were a few springs that you would need to buy to be able to make the device work. The CAD files in a format that you could go to a rapid prototyping shop and be able to reproduce these. Summary of the animal study, summary of the functional tests, and instructions of how to assemble these and how to use them. We were working with the bioengineering department and professors there who came up with the instructions on how to use the device, and then also how to even file for FDA certification so that commercial organizations could produce these in high quantities. As of today, there have been 71 organizations that have signed license agreements from, my understanding is 15 countries from all over the world. There's been 5 organizations that we know about that have actually working prototypes, and 2 companies are commercializing the device. One of the companies is Belkin. they have contacted us and indicated to us that they're commercializing the device. The other thing that's happened recently, back in December too, of course, being an academic institution, Bill King has a publication with, I don't know how many authors it has on it. I think about probably 20 to 30 authors on it. It's the emergency ventilator for COVID-19. It was published online. This is PLOS 1, December 2020, and there's the link to that. And that really, this is really talks more about, you know, whenever you're in a situation where you need to respond quickly and bring engineers together. I think part of it is describing this emergency ventilator, but I think part of it is also describing how do you bring a team like this together to actually, within 2 weeks, have a working device to solve a problem. I think that's interesting too. One of the things that I'd have to say just for myself as I kind of close up my talk today is that working on this, the people that I worked with, and if you went to the University of Illinois or any university or college of engineering, what you find is that whenever you work on a project like that, there is so many things that we probably deal with day to day that are just gone. I just got to work with some of the brightest individuals I've ever worked with, but also the most committed. I mean, these were obviously long hours, but also everyone was focused on getting the right answer and getting it done. So that's one thing, is that, you know, if you look at a university system, this is the kind of thing that we can do, is bring several engineers together to work on a project like this. The other thing that I thought is just, you know, as I was thinking about it, just the background that I had for this project. Over the years, you know, we sometimes as engineers, and those of you that are engineers, you probably realize you have all of these things that are accumulating in your life. You have experiences with things you think will never come up, that you'll never use. I worked at Ford Motor Company and had experience with injection molding. I had been at Rutgers and received one of the first stereolithography machines as part of a class I was teaching. I had even, you know, early on in my childhood, worked with my father, who taught me how to build things with my hands. And I found all of these things actually came to bear when I was involved in the design process here. And we were joking about this, Bill and I were joking, and we were looking at my background, and he said, you know, you were really made to be able to be involved and work on the engineering team. And as we were talking about my background, and we joked at one time that, you know, yeah, everything except supersonic flow. As Tom had said, I'm kind of a supersonic high-speed flow guy. And at the time, we joked about that. We hadn't designed the ejector system to regulate the O2 level in the device. And it turned out that once I did that, there's a supersonic underexpanded jet in that ejector. So I even used some supersonic flow experience that I had. So that's one thing, is just, you know, if you are a high school or college student, just realize all these experiences that you're having are just going to help you someday. And the other thing is just relationships. You know, I had a relationship with a fireman friend who just helped me out in the practicality of how this device might work. But also the friendships that I've had through other engineers. You really find that when you come into a project like this, it's really important to have those great relationships, because you obviously can't do something like that alone, something like this alone. So with that, you know, I'd like to thank you for again inviting me to talk about something that I love to talk about. If anyone has any questions, I don't know if anyone's put any questions in the chat yet. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.
Hello, Dr. Elliot.
Yes.
I was writing my question out in the chat, but it was taking a little bit of time.
Okay. All right.
First, I'd just like to say thanks for all the work you've done and helping save people's life. I think it's really important and great to see people doing meaningful work
Okay.
with like sciences. So my name is Uchenna, and I'm a senior at UIUC in Systems Engineering and Design. Yeah, and in my design courses, specifically in regards to engineering design, something I've heard a lot is iteration. So when you're building a new design or a new product, just to do a lot of prototypes and a lot of testing and reconfiguring your design to get to something that works and something that works well. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit about, or hear you talk a little bit more about that prototyping process. Like, how many iterations did you guys have to do before you were able to get a design that you were comfortable with?
Oh, great. That's an excellent question. I haven't been asked that question before. And if you ever want to, make sure you stop by my office. I'd love to meet you once all of our social distancing is done with. But yeah, as far as, whenever you're looking at multiple designs, I think, one, we did have a reference design that really narrowed some things down for us. So that helped us out. But basically what we did, as far as looking at multiple iterations, I would say, even though we had the first working prototype, we probably went through 5 to 10 iterations relatively quickly. Some of those happened in a parallel way too. So for example, the diaphragm, the spring, and also the sealing system, we actually did about 4 designs at the same time. And so I think the thing to do is to think about, what things can you look forward to and say, okay, these are things I think I've got, maybe some theoretical analysis of that I'm getting pretty close, but to try to bound some of your designs around those. And I would say that diaphragm was one, the ejector was another one. What things could we modify? We were looking at the ejector, and so a decision was made, hey, we can, what things can you modify, test and modify? So for example, with the ejector, the internal hole size is very important, and it really determines what the flow rate of the oxygen is into that ejector. But it's also one thing that we could keep modifying, and so we would modify and test. So it's kind of looking at those different ways to have iteration. You're exactly right, though. I would find it surprising that anyone can take a complicated device and design it correctly the first thing. But when your time schedule is so short, the important thing is to look at, what iterations can I do in a parallel way? So I guess that's how I'd answer that question.
Thank you, Professor. I appreciate that. And I definitely would like to connect with you when this clears up a little bit.
Oh yeah, that would be fantastic. I'd love to meet you.
This is Tom. I'm checking the chat. I don't see any other questions right now, but I'd like to make a comment and pose a question,
Sure.
which is, I've done product development for medical devices, and I've gone through this many times, but never with anywhere near the kind of speed that you guys did. And it's really impressive how complete your project is. It was really set up for clearance by FDA or any regulatory agency. And I'm really impressed at how, in a university environment, you guys had the mindset of the clinical and regulatory side of things, especially the animal study. Animal studies can add a year to a project easily, and you guys had, the vet school and South Farms, right at your disposal. So that's really impressive. I guess the question I've got, which is on any project, decision making is important. So how did you guys, how did your team do decision making, and who was kind of the chief engineer that made the decisions, or was it a group arrangement?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So first, on this project, financially, we were given basically don't go through the universe. I was putting things on my credit card, and I was given anything you buy, don't worry about it. It's going to be taken care of. So that was one privilege that we had. Bill King really organized everything. I think he was keeping track of, overall, I would say decisions, let's say on kind of the overarching decisions, were we going to do animal testing? When would we cut that off? Those were done by Bill King, and also with the dean's input too. There was, how much animal testing should we do once we saw the device work? It was interesting during that time. We had considered shutting the animal study, down quickly, and getting the design out. And it was interesting because we had one anomaly that occurred while we were testing the device. We thought we knew why it happened. The animal wasn't expelling as much CO2 as we would like, and we thought it was just due to the length of the hose that we had, or the tubing that we had towards the animal. And so they allowed us to test one more time. And so those were kind of the overarching ones. Stefan, I'd have to credit. He was really the manager of the engineering team that I was on. And one, just personality wise, he just had a fantastic positive personality, to encourage people to argue, I would say argue effectively. So things that we really thought were important, we would argue about those, but in a very respectful way, and everyone knew that we were going towards one solution. And so he did a really great job about that. But the other thing too, the other thing I think that I learned, and I especially learned this, I think from Stefan too, was that on a project like this, you kind of recognize that there are people that have kind of their own ideas and an own agenda, and may lead to something, but it may be more agenda driven. And so Stefan did a good job about not discouraging that, but making sure that those kind of things did not bring down the whole project. And so, for example, if we had someone that had an idea that, might not work, we kind of allowed them to go and investigate that, but made sure that we still had kind of this golden track that was moving forward, and that if that didn't work out, it wasn't going to harm the whole project. And I would have to credit Stefan. He just did a fantastic job about, encouraging that person, but not making sure the whole project didn't suffer because of that. And some of you that have been engineers for a long time, you've probably experienced that. You work with people and you're saying, are you giving me the answer to get your way, or to get the project moving forward? And so it's not an easy thing to do, and he really pulled that off well. So
that's fantastic. So here's another question we have, which is, how did you deal with patent or other intellectual property concerns?
Yeah, so fortunately, I was on the engineering team. So they were looking at that, and there was lawyers that were involved, and even the licensing, and I'm sure that there were lawyers involved in as far as responsibilities and things like that. Basically, they had given me, guidance as far as, what we could do, which was, I think there were certain rules in place that allowed us to be able to really investigate this and develop this in a very open manner, But I know the College of Engineering had a few lawyers on this that they were consulting, just to make sure that we weren't going to be in trouble, later by that. And so that was a different team. So I guess that's as much as I know. And you'll see that in that license, that if you would pull that up, there's certain language in there that the lawyers had looked at to make sure that we weren't doing anything that was going to come back on the university. So.
Well, it sounds like you had a really good team, Greg, and that's rare. Everybody talks about it in their, team building and all that, but when you have it and you feel it, it's really a special thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely was. Yeah, it was a privilege to be part of it. And, I would love to have this team work on about 5 other projects that I have, but unfortunately I can't do that. So,
well, hopefully something less safety critical comes along.
yes, yes.
I think we're about ready for wrap up. There's one point I'd like to make. It's a little bit outside our agenda, but I think it would be of interest to especially the Engineers Foundation members and the Union League Club members, which is, I don't know if this is very well known, in the Chicago area, but there's the Carle, Illinois College of Medicine in Champaign is basically the first medical school in the country with an engineering focus. And this is a collaboration between the university and Carle Clinic, which if you've been down there, it's right across Green Street. So Greg, do you have any words on that, or was that organization part of this activity?
Yeah. So if you look at several of the members, especially in the bioengineering side, were part of that new kind of branch of engineering that we have here. And so, yes, they were involved. And it kind of was that case study of what happens when you put medical doctors and engineers together on a project. So the medical doctors that we got to work with, I think because we had set up, that program, and I still even remember this, the respiratory doctor that I was talking with, they would say things when we were talking to them. Oh, I know how engineers think. This is why you're saying that, so it was quite obvious that they were used to talking to engineers, which I think just helped, because they knew that there were certain things that we cared about that they said, I know you're going to care about this. You don't need to care about this, and so that really helped, just having that, start of that College of Medicine and Engineering. It really helped us to be able to communicate better, and especially on the medical side, I think they understood us much better than I understood them. So.
Excellent. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us for our engineering spotlight on engineers mobilizing to fight COVID-19. And we look forward to presenting more discussions and put a spotlight on more important topics going forward. The recordings from today's presentation will be available soon, and you will receive a link to the videos by email. And thank you again to our speaker, Dr. Greg Elliot, for facilitating today's discussions. And many thanks to today's sponsors, Tom Penn, Stephen Schlegel, the Kroll family, and Martha Jean Martin. More information about Chicago Engineers Foundation is available at our website, chicagoengineersfoundation.org, and via our social media pages. And we have several events coming up, including a virtual kickoff to National Engineers Week on February 22nd. So I hope to see you there as well.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks
everybody,
much.
and thank you, Greg.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed the time.
Thank you, Doc.
We can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. We can go ahead and get started. Welcome.